how to light this video. I also kind of feel like this is like an awkward angle, and and that was basically just a shot of my boobs. So do you know what? We're just going to leave you here. I'm going to be pasty, awkwardly angled, and also it's very early in the morning, so my filter hasn't turned on yet. Really, I can't like censor myself before 10 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's very excited for my early morning WhatsApp, so you're in for a treat. It's Leanne and welcome to my tops and bottoms, the video in which I wrap up my month by telling you only about the things that I really loved and the things that I really freaking did not love. And in fact, in some cases, hated. I said this before in my TBR, which was a little bit late because you know this one is also a little very late. So May was a particularly bad mental health month. Much struggle was had, but also many books were read, mainly in an attempt to avoid all of my problems. And so for once, I was actually spoilt for choice about what I put on my tops list. So I want to give you two honourable mentions, things that I absolutely adored. In May, I recreated a childhood holiday for little Leanne, and I dived into a couple of new series that I was super excited for, and I ended up really loving Discovery of Witches and Murder Most Unladylike. The first book in both of these series absolutely knocked my socks off, so if you want more of my detailed thoughts about them, I will link that vlog down below, because I simply do not have space to gush about everything that I want to gush about in this video. Top, bottom, top, bottom, top. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Top, bottom, top, bottom, top. So that we end on a positive note, because I have not calculated this well the last couple of months and we've ended with like a meh. Onwards. The first top that I have is a horror book. And weirdly, I kind of thought that I had already covered this. Maybe it's just because I talked about it so much when I finished it, because I loved it so much. But the book that I am talking about is The Twisted Ones by Kingfisher. This is a quintessentially Leanne book in a couple of different ways. It is about a woman called Mouse who goes to her grandmother's old house, so first very Leanne thing, to clean out all of her possessions after she has died. But when Mouse gets there, she discovers that not only is her grandma's house extremely creepy, but it is also in the middle of some woods. A check. Mouse has some very complicated family dynamics. A check. But when she gets to Grandma's house to clean it out, she discovers that the situation is much worse than she could ever have thought, because her grandma was a hoarder. A check. 4 of Leanne's favourite specialist interests in one book. Oh my! I will admit I was a little bit trepidatious when I first went into this one for a couple of reasons. The first being that Mouse doesn't go to the woods alone, she also takes her dog with her, and I was very deeply concerned that something bad would happen to the dog, which is absolutely a no for me. If I know that there's going to be like on the page gruesome animal death in a book, I just note my way out right from the start. Although if it was a person it would be fine, know what I'm saying? There's no way around it, I'm just going to gift you with that knowledge. The dog does not die, the dog is freaking glorious. I loved so many things about this book. There is not a single character in here that I was not invested in, including one that only appears in diary entries. I know bad things have happened to you, but I'm just going to pretend that they didn't because you're a really nice person. Mouse's grandmother's house is really tucked away in the backwoods, but when she gets there, she actually discovers that there's a person who lives kind of just across a big road and forest path. And it turns out that the people who live there are a kind of very small commune. They do have that feel like they were kind of just thrown together in a peace and love kind of way. The actual range of representation that Kingfisher has managed to fit into the 4 core people, like at the heart of this novel, is insane. We have characters from all different racial backgrounds and all different beliefs. We have a character who has very complex mental health needs that are very lovingly and in a very like pastoral and wholesome way cared for by their friends. And the person that Mouse really befriends and gets to know the most is an older woman. So not in the usual range of between 25 and 35, which seems to be the acceptable age for a character in a novel. She's closer to her 60s, she's been there for a long time, and she's not letting anything in the woods scare her off. And also, I would not want to get in her way when she's mad. She kicks some serious ass. And they're all so funny. T. Kingfisher's tone in this novel really kind of reminds me of urban fantasy. There's short, sharp, snappy sentences. There's a lot of internal monologue from Mouse, which is very deeply sarcastic. She knows her own worth and she doesn't question it, but she does question her own choices sometimes. Like, why did I do that? Why did I do that? And yet they're the exact choices that I would have made in those situations. Honestly, most of this book is cracklingly funny, and I think that is the thing that makes the horror elements so much more horrible. Kind of horror novels that I really like are ominous horror novels. The kind of like, is there something over my shoulder? Like, is there a ghost in this house, or is it in my own mind? But it takes a lot to take that vibe and actually make me scared. Despite Lovely Wife Helen's stories of taking me to the bathroom in the middle of the night because I have read a horror book just before bed, I'm actually pretty unspookable. But I was spooked and shook, and I am still very not okay with some of the things that happened in this novel. There's the kind of creeping, very slow, I don't know what this is, but it's coming to get me thing going on, and I have nothing bad to say. I have nothing bad to say, only good things. And now for my first bottom. Controversial opinions with Leanne. I feel the hate. I can see the thumbs downs in my mind. Natural lighting, kids, what you gonna do? The first book on my bottoms list is Heartstopper Volume 4 by Alice Oseman. Before you cancel me and unsubscribe in one fell swoop, please to be listening to my reasoning, because it's not actually that I outright hated this book. Heartstopper Volume 4 is obviously the continuation of Alice Oseman's Nick and Charlie graphic novels. They are two characters that appeared in her novel Solitaire, and she loved their story so much that she created a graphic novel series. And if you guys remember correctly, you will know that the first 3 volumes of this I absolutely loved. But I feel like this volume really suffered from I don't know how to tell this section of the story syndrome. This volume deals with Nick and Charlie as an established couple who are both working through their own issues, but are also confronting a lot of Charlie's issues with his eating disorder, and Nick trying to work out how to support him and learning that, you know, you can't fix other people, you just have to be there to help nudge them along. And I got that that was what Alice Oseman was trying to say with this one, but unfortunately I was A, bored, and B, felt really disconnected from the characters, because at the beginning of this novel, Nick and Charlie aren't together. Nick is on holiday with his family, Charlie is left at home, it's their first big period of separation, and they can't really get in touch with each other a lot, signal's not good. There's a lot of really like awkward and very convenient reasons why they can't talk to each other when Nick's abroad, despite the fact that, you know, internet cafes and roaming data and all of that kind of stuff all exist, and it's not actually as difficult to get in touch with people anymore. It kind of felt like Alice Oseman was conveniently borrowing a piece of the 90s in order to further the plot at the beginning of this one. It felt to me like bad 90s rom-com vibes, and I really feel like it did that portion of the story a disservice. Having Nick abroad so that he had all this space away from Charlie to like really healthily work through how he was going to help him felt really disingenuous to the rest of the series, where it's just kind of kids muddling through their everyday. You don't often get a lot of time to just go on holiday and sit and have a good think about how you're going to best support your boyfriend. Mostly you just have to learn to do it a little bit every day as you're rubbing along together. It meant that by the time that they actually got back together at the like end of the novel, and you know, some really lovely things did happen, that I had sparks of, oh, that's the love that I had for this series previously vibes. I was already too disengaged and a little bit resentful about the entire thing to like really properly sink into it and enjoy it. And again, like I say, I could totally see what Alice Oseman was trying to do, but I feel like it was more written for a very obvious reader. It felt almost like it broke the fourth wall a little bit in the This is how we healthily deal with this. This is then how we confront this. This is what you could do with your friends. It felt like it was written for teenagers who were in that place, but it was a very like paint by numbers version of it. That being said, I'm still going to go on and read the 5th and final volume. Of course, I want to know how their story ends, and it hasn't changed how much I love the first 3, so it's just a blip. But it was a pretty big blip that I felt very like about when I read it. Wow, I complained about that one for so long that my battery actually died. Where were we? Ah yes, we were moving on to a top, to a book that took me completely by surprise. That book is of course the Once and Future Witches. But why can't I say that title? The Once and Future Witches by Alix E. Harrow. The Once and Future Witches is set just after the original Salem witch trials in New Salem, a city apparently without sin, where 3 sister witches who have had witching passed down through their family, although it is now only in broken fragments and intentions, are completely estranged from each other, but find themselves all drawn back together by one magical occurrence. They quickly realise that in New Salem their only way to survive is by holding on to each other, thereby forcing them to confront some of the issues in their past, which are many. But they also discover that 3 of them may not be enough, and so they end up signing up with the suffragists of New Salem, women who want to change the world. And the subtitle for this one, which still gives me shivers, is "There's no such thing as witches, but there will be." I was so nervous going into this book. I really wanted a witch story. I've wanted some more stories about witches for a really long time. I've read almost everything that I can find in the urban fantasy genre, and I was starting to get to the point where I was getting a bit resentful that there was no other good witch stuff out there. So when this one landed on my lap, I was like, please let it be good. Please let it have the kind of witchcraft that I want, which is witchcraft with grimoires and magical words and black cats and herbs. Traditional witchcraft that, you know, Disney took and shined up a little bit. And not only was I worried that it wouldn't have that kind of witchcraft, but I was also worried that the way that it was written would put me off, because it is a very, very lushly detailed book. And sometimes that kind of writing that has like one foot in literary fiction really puts me off. But something about this book just tied all of those elements together in a perfect bow, and I loved it. Writing never felt like it was too much. It never felt overwritten. I always felt kind of like I was reading a fairy tale, but then you would get these really grim dumps of reality sometimes that just cut through all of like the lyrical language, and it was just great. I also sometimes have an issue with books that have one foot in literary fiction in that the actual conversations never feel authentic. Like, I don't feel like those are words that people would use to talk to each other, but this did not have that. This had at all times conversations that felt really real, conversations that I felt like I had overheard because they felt so real. There was a lot of tension between a lot of different characters, and it came like seething off the page. It was just great. The actual relationship between the sisters, you guys know that I love books about sisters, was just, oh, it was so multi-layered, weirdly enough, that it reminded me of the sisters that Karen Slaughter writes, who don't necessarily love each other all the time, and who actually really see each other's faults and could make lists of them, but despite that, they love each other and they're bound to each other in some way, and by the end of it they come to understand the other person's perspective a bit better. And oh, some of the stuff that they go through together, there's a lot of trigger warnings in here for early abuse in their childhood, and the way that it has pitted them against each other and they have to like unpick that trauma was just, it was great. And the magic in here was exactly what I wanted. At the start of each chapter there's a tiny little snippet which is the words to a spell, and it explains then what that spell needs, like cobwebs, a sharp prick of the finger, and steely wits. And it just felt so real. It felt like something that had existed. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. It felt like something that had existed in our world and which doesn't anymore. Something that we lost through the ages. I was so sucked in by the mythology of it. I felt like it could easily be our real history, and I just, oh, it was great. It was great. I want to reread it again right now, and I'm pretty much sure that I'm going to be reading anything ever that Alix E. Harrow writes. If you would like a historical, gritty, witchy tale that also has fairy tale vibes, pick up this one. Next up, another bottom. Now this is also a book that I read for my childhood reading week that I put together, and I wanted to kind of talk about it in a little bit more depth because I think it's very indicative of a thing that happens in thrillers a lot. So my last bottom on this list is Killing Eve by Luke Jennings. Killing Eve is not actually the original title of this novel, it is instead Codename Villanelle, but of course Killing Eve is the title that the TV series with Sandra Oh was given. I have obviously also watched the TV series, I am a big fan of it, and that's why when I saw these books I was like, I need them, I need to try them now. I was shocked when I got these books by how short they were, because in the show the internal lives of Eve and Villanelle are like so detailed. You get so much of their thought processes and the blow by blows of what's going on in their head as they're being forced to act it out. And when I looked at how long these were, which is like under 280 pages, I was like, I don't know whether that is going to be able to convey the same level of complexity, and in fact I was correct and they do not. Not only that, but I actually hated the prose in these books. It was very, very sparse, it was very journalistic, the sentences were very short, there was not much detail about anything other than the actual, like, she opened the door, she went down the stairs. When I looked up a biography of Luke Jennings to see what else they had written, I discovered that they were a journalist, and as soon as I found that out I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. There's not a lot of showing, none of the sentences had any padding whatsoever. It was very much like Villanelle was bad, and because of that, despite the fact that it was such a small book, I was kind of really bored in parts because I didn't really engage with any of the characters. I didn't fall in love with Eve and Villanelle the way that I did in the show. They felt very 2D for me, but they also felt very, very much like they had been written by a man. Especially Eve Pulaski's character. So in the show, Sandra Oh brings a lot of richness, of course, because she is a superstar and I love her. But Eve in the show fights for a job and then is given a much bigger job than she ever thought she could manage, and then realises that she's absolutely kick-ass at it, and realises that her whole real life is actually suffocating her, and that she has been in a box the entire time, and that she needs to get out of that because it's killing her slowly, much more slowly than anything that Villanelle would do. Whereas in the book it felt really judgy, it felt really like Eve should not be looking after a killer, she should be at home with her husband, cooking him dinner, he should come home every day to her there, and that should be how it is. And I don't know, it was very uncomfortable. A lot of those scenes I felt like her husband's feelings were the ones that were being described, not hers as the character whose eyes we were supposed to be seeing things through. Anytime there was a man on the page, I felt like that man was more authentic than any woman that was on the page, and that was a problem for me. Another thing for me was that I didn't really feel the stakes in the novel as much as you do in the show. I feel like in the show there's definitely like a thing hanging over you, there's a certain doom hanging over you, and although there's like the comedy of like Villanelle, the kind of relief part of the show where although she is clearly insane, she's also kind of quite amusing, and you can't really deny that some of the things that she chooses to do are things that we would really want to do if we were like liberated enough to do it and, you know, less scared of consequences. But despite that, despite the fact that there is this really insane serial killer for hire going around knocking people off, I didn't ever really feel like there was any pressure. There was nothing in the pacing that was making me think, oh my god, bad things are gonna happen. And that was, I don't know how you fail to do that in a 250 page novel in which most of it is action and not a lot of it is internal monologue. This is one that has actually worn on me worse since I read it. Some books you know that you read and you just can't stop thinking of. Like Once and Future Witches, which is a book that since I've read it I've thought of almost every day. This one did the opposite. It made me think of it, but my opinion about it just got worse and worse as time went on. And so I said in my vlog that I would probably carry on and read this series because this one was just okay for me at the time, and they're all very, very short. So I kind of want to finish it off and see where it goes. And I think, if I'm honest, I will probably stick with that. I will probably read the rest of them because they're tiny, but I will very much be hate reading them, and then you're probably going to have to hear about it. So you're welcome. And then finally, woohoo, Leanne has managed to end on a top for once. We're going out on a high, guys. The last book that I read and absolutely loved last month was Chloe Brown. Of course it was. Y'all knew it was gonna happen. Y'all told me that it was gonna happen, and you were right. Take that as a gift from me to you. I don't say it all that often, but you were right. This book was exactly the book that I needed to cheer me up at the end of the month. I became utterly obsessed with it. I was kind of accidentally buddy reading it with Becca. We ended up accidentally reading it at the same time and sending each other obsessive messages like, have you got to this part yet? And honestly, I don't think I've screamed about a book as much as I've screamed about this one in like pure fangirl. I am down for reading anything that Talia Hibbert has ever written. Chloe Brown is a woman who lives with a lot of baggage and a lot of walls in her head. There's a lot of things in Chloe's life that tells her that she can't and she shouldn't. She has a chronic health condition that when it was finally diagnosed really destroyed her entire life, and she started to live like a hermit after it. And then at the beginning of this novel, Chloe is almost run over by a car, which is not any one of the ways that she pictured that she might die. And she realises that she hasn't really lived, and she doesn't want to die without having really lived. And so she makes herself a list of things that she wants to do, and one of them is moving out and getting her own flat, something that she didn't ever think that she could manage to do. And with this flat comes the attendant for the block of flats, the person who fixes things when they are broken, Redford Morgan. And Red doesn't really like Chloe all that much because Chloe's a bit of a bitch. But you know what? Things change. I loved this book so much. As a person who lives with many chronic health things, it was so nice to see a romance which didn't skirt around them at the edges. I've read a few different books in the past where one of the characters does identify as having an illness of some kind, but it's very much like a background thing that's occasionally conveniently mentioned and then like shuffled aside when it's in the way of the plot. But Chloe's condition is like front and centre. You are told that it impacts her every day, and you see that it impacts her every day, and yet it doesn't stop her being or being treated as a person, and that made my heart so very happy. There's also a particular thing that romance novels do, especially with women who have any kind of physical problems, and that is they make the man the saviour, and they use it very much to infantilize the woman, and the man does a lot of like very strong heroic things to make everything better, and that was just so far from the case in this. It was so delicately dealt with that I cried a few times at places where I don't think I was meant to cry because I felt so seen. It is literally representative of some conversations that lovely wife Helen and I have together when I'm not doing very well. It's just great. But this book does two other things that I really loved. One of them is that it shows Chloe as a multi-layered and complicated person who is not always pleasing. Chronic health conditions of any kind and the mental illness that they often lead you into can not make you the most personable person. When you're in pain and when you're tired and when you only have like 3 brain cells firing, it can sometimes make you blunt or inarticulate or grumpy, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you're like a whole person and you have good sides too, and those are just bad moments. And both of those extremes were represented in here, as well as this middle part where people can accept you as having both of these extremes existing in the one person. But the other thing that it did that I really loved was that it gave Red, who is this big burly biker guy with like long red hair and tattoos, it gave him complicated, complex mental health conditions. It gave him the ability to be an artist and to have anxiety about his art and his creativity and his worth. It was so nice to see Red kind of like sensitively and slowly trying to engage with himself again, trying to allow parts of him not to be numb, trying to feel things all the way through to the other side and not be afraid of the consequences of that. It was so nice to see therapy in a few different ways talked about. It was just such a good book. It was masterfully done. There is nothing that I would change about it, and I think every single one of you need to read it, especially if you love a good steamy scene. That's all I'm saying. So that's it, guys. guys, those are all of my tops and all of my bottoms, and probably all of my boobs in a few passionate shots. Sorry, not sorry. May was such a good reading month that I don't know whether June has a chance of managing to stand up to it, but it's trying really hard. I have already finished a book that I think may be the best thriller that I have read in the last 10 years, and I'm still kind of dazed about it. I'm still not over it. So as always guys, if you have read any of the books that I've talked about here today, please let me know your opinions on them down in the comments, because we do love an opinion on this channel. And if there are any books that you would like to recommend to me based on any of the books that I have read, please do that, because June is the month that the book buying ban ends. More on that in a future video. If you are new here, please consider sticking around and subscribing. We are a very welcoming bunch. And if you like this video, please whack the thumbs up button so that YouTube knows that you liked it and that maybe it will show it to other people. And I will speak to all of you guys soon. Bye! I have such a sore throat, but it's only because of my own passionate yelling, so I don't get to complain about it. Except to you. I'm complaining to you right now, because that's the kind of friends that we are.